Hey everyone, Miss Knittycat here, and in this video I'm going to actually re-demonstrate how to do the one color brioche hat. So this is sort of a reboot of my previous one color brioche hat video that I already have on YouTube, which several of you have already viewed and liked and have tried to follow. And I know some of you, based on your comments, you've had a little bit of difficulty with that video or with that pattern. And I have to say a couple things. One was my error or oversight. I didn't realize that in the video one of the rows repeated actually, and I think one user pointed that out or one viewer pointed that out, and I didn't quite realize what they were saying at that time, so totally my bad. I missed that during editing, so it might have been a little bit confusing for those of you who tried to follow that video. And then also, since I knit my very first one color brioche hat, which was this one here, this green one, I knit it in two different colors, but it's just the one row pattern, the one color pattern rather. Since then, I've modified the ending of one of the rows to make it a more seamless join or a seamless round when you work it in the round. And then also I've modified the decreases just a little bit to make it a little bit more shapelier, I should say. So I figured it would be a good time to do a one color brioche hat. Now I've also worked on several two color brioche hats, and here's just a few samples in a couple different colors, and they are completely reversible, so I'm really excited about these as well. And I will get the pattern all written out and hope to post a video on those maybe by later in the week or maybe the week after Thanksgiving. But for now, I'm going to show you how to do this one color brioche video again. And in this video, I am showing you very detailed. I'm going to start at the cast on. I'm going to show you how to do the first few rows, and then I'm also going to show you how to do the decreases. I'm actually going to demonstrate that just so that it's a little bit easier and hopefully won't be confusing, because I know sometimes when you read the brioche pattern it can be confusing. So this way you can see the steps in the video and you can follow the pattern as well, which I've provided in the description field. It is a fairly long pattern, but it'll all fit in the description field, and so you should be able to just follow that as well. And let's see, there was one other point. Yes, so the brioche pattern that I've provided, I've actually provided it for this type of yarn, this Red Heart with Love yarn. I was working on a brioche hat for that, and it's a worsted weight yarn, medium weight. This is a skein of 6 ounces, so about 170 grams, and that should be enough to knit up one hat. You can certainly do it in a solid color, or you could choose a variegated color. That'll work as well. It is 100% acrylic, and but it is a premium acrylic, and I do like the feel of this yarn. It feels really nice and soft. Now for this size of yarn, I've actually gone ahead and used a bigger needle, so I'm using a size 9 circular needle. So if you follow the pattern exactly and get the same exact yarn or a similar yarn of a similar thickness and gauge, and I've provided the gauge in the description field as well, then you're going to need size 9 circular needles, 16 inches to be able to knit the hat, and then also size 9 double pointed needles to shape the hat towards the end. Okay, so let's get started. So what I've done here is I've cast on 64 stitches, which is what the pattern will tell you to cast on for this hat. And if you follow the exact pattern, if you want to cast on more stitches, if your yarn is a little bit thinner, or if you use a different needle size, you can certainly cast on more. The pattern will work if your stitches are increased in increments of 16, and I know that seems like a lot, but if you want to follow the decreases at the end exactly, then that's the number of stitches you have to increase. So you may have to adjust the gauge a little bit. Hopefully you'll be able to find yarn that's about this thickness that gives you a similar gauge, and then you can just follow the pattern exactly. But again, all the details are provided below. So once you've cast on your stitches, and I've used the long tail cast on, you can use whatever cast on you choose, go ahead and put in a stitch marker or a safety pin or some sort of a marker to mark the end of the row. Now you want to have your stitches arranged like this on the needle, so they're all pointing in the same direction. That way when you pick up your needles to start knitting, your work is not twisted. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna pick it up like this, and I'm going to insert it in here and start knitting. Okay, now the very first row that you do in brioche is a setup row, and you only do the setup row once. So this is the slightly tricky part. You want to bring the yarn to the front like this. Okay, then you want to slip the next stitch, so just insert as if to purl and bring the yarn over. All right, and now you're going to take this yarn that was in the front and you're going to do a yarn over, which means you're going to wrap it all the way around. Okay, and then the next stitch is a purl one. All right, and as you can see, now we've joined the work, right? Our work is now this one ring. And so one other point, when you cast on your stitches, you want to cast them a little bit loose, because for this first row, it's going to be a little bit tough to stretch the stitches, but you'll be able to do it. And once you've done that first row, then it'll work just great. All right, so we did that. We brought the yarn to the front, we slipped the stitch, then we did a yarn over, and we purled. Now the yarn is already in the front, so you don't have to keep bringing the yarn to the front. At this point on, you're just going to do this repeat for the rest of the row. You're going to slip a stitch, you're going to do the yarn all the way around, yarn over, and purl. Slip, yarn around, and purl. And as you keep knitting, you're going to have to bring your stitches over or bring them in closer, so it's easier to knit at the edges. All right, so yarn is already in the front. Slip, yarn around, and purl. Slip, yarn around, and purl. So you're just going to keep doing this all the way to the end, and then that's the setup row done. So I'm going to continue on, and I'll meet you guys back up here until I just have a few stitches left. Okay, so I've now almost completed that first setup row, and I just have a few more stitches left. So here we go. Slip, yarn over, and purl. Slip, yarn over, purl. And I will end this setup row in a slip, yarn over, and purl. And when you do this first row, anytime you've joined in the round, sometimes when you're done, you'll get this little bit of a big gap here. And it might feel a little wonky, especially with this one, because we had that yarn in the front when we joined this, and that's okay. This gap will disappear as you work on it. So once you've got to that end, you're going to take this stitch marker off and bring it back here. Now the setup row is just once, and the reason why we do the setup row is so that we can create these brioche stitches, these two stitches that you can see that form together. Together, those two stitches are called the brioche stitch. So you have alternating brioche stitch, regular stitch, brioche, regular, brioche, regular. So this is why you have to do the setup row, so that you can have these brioche stitches in place, and then that way in the two rows that you'll be doing next and keep repeating those two rows, the brioche stitches are already there in that very first setup row. So this row, just doing it once, and that's it. So now your yarn is in the front because you just did a purl. You're going to take the yarn to the back, and the row one, the pattern repeat is a bark, what's called a brioche knit. Then you bring the yarn forward and you slip one. So let's see how we do that. To bark it, you see there's two stitches on here. Actually, let me do this to make it a little bit better. So here again, you can see we have our two stitches together, which is the brioche stitch, then single stitch, brioche stitch, single stitch. So this very first stitch that we have with this wonky yarn over, that's actually a brioche stitch. So we're going to bark that stitch or brioche knit it together. So you're going to take your right needle and insert it into both of those loops and knit it. And so that's a brioche knit or a bark. Then you bring the yarn to the front, and then you slip one stitch. Now you'll notice that the yarn is in the front and you want it there. You're just going to do this repeat. You're going to brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one, brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one, all the way to the end, okay? Because watch what happens. Now we've brioche knit, we've brought the yarn to the front, and we've slipped one. Now when we go to knit this one, the brioche knit, this yarn that is in the front is going to give us our brioche stitch for the next row. Okay, so brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one, brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one, brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one. And this might take a little bit of practice because you automatically tend to take the yarn to the back to try and do a knit. But remember, in this row, you want that yarn to stay in the front. So brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one. So you're going to keep doing this repeat all the way to the end. So I'm going to stop here, get to that point, and then I'll meet up with you when I have just a few more stitches left to go in the row. All right. I'm almost at the end of my first row. I only have a few more stitches to go, so let me finish those. And all right, here we go. So brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip one, brioche knit, yarn to the front, and then slip one. Now comes the slightly tricky part. You brioche knit, you yarn to the front, and you slip one. And that's the end of row one. Your yarn is in the front and you've just slipped that last stitch. You're going to take the marker and slip it over. Now begins row two. Now for row two, the pattern will tell you to actually slip one, do a yarn over, and then burp. So now your yarn is in the front. Before you do that, you actually want to take the yarn, bring the yarn to the front like that. Because here's what happens. You'll notice in this row that we just finished, we want to have alternating brioche stitch, single stitch, right? So we've had a brioche stitch, single stitch, brioche, single, brioche, single. This needs to be a brioche. If I don't do this bit of bringing the yarn to the front, if I don't do that part, let me find my yarn. There it is. Okay, my yarn is ended in the front and the end of that, or in the front at the end of that row. But if I don't bring the yarn all the way around, then I don't get this as a brioche stitch. And this is what was missing in my previous one. There's no harm in that, except when you go to do the next row, instead of doing a burp, this stitch will just end up being a purl. So do this little bit. I know it looks a little funny, but if you follow the pattern will tell you at the start of row two to bring the yarn to the front, then you slip the marker, and now you're ready to get started with row two. So row two, you're going to slip the first stitch, then you're going to do a yarn over, which in this case is going to be all the way around, wrapping the yarn all the way around, and then you're going to burp this brioche stitch. So it's the opposite of brioche knit. We're doing a brioche purl, and you'll notice it is a brioche stitch. It's those two stitches joined together. So we're going to do a brioche purl. So you insert as if to purl and purl, and that's it. That's going to be your repeat. Now at the end of this brioche purl, your yarn is in the front. You can leave the yarn in the front because from now on you're just going to do slip one, yarn over as in all the way around, and a purl, a brioche purl. Slip one, yarn all the way around, and a brioche purl. Slip one, yarn all the way around, brioche purl. And so you're just going to repeat this all the way through to the end. So I'm actually going to finish this row and come back to this end so I can show you how to get started back again with row one. Because from this point on, once you've done row two, from this point on, you're just going to keep repeating row one, row two, row one, row two, all the way till the hat measures the length that you want, and then you're going to start doing the decreases. So let me meet you guys back up here when I'm just towards the end of row two. So I'm now almost at the end of row two. I just have a few more stitches to go. So here we go. I'm going to slip one, yarn over, and burp, or brioche purl, slip one, yarn over, burp. Now I'm at the last two stitches before the stitch marker. You can see the stitch marker is right here. And so this is just a slip, yarn over, and a burp. Okay? And you'll see now we do have a burp stitch here because we did that last, bringing the yarn to the front. Okay, now when you do this, you'll notice something weird. You see sort of this little line that goes here, and that is because we brought the yarn to the front in that last row before we started row 2, and then in row 2 we took the yarn around again, and so that's what causes this little thing to happen, but it's just natural. There's nothing to worry. You take out your slip marker or stitch marker and put it on here, and now you're going to get ready to start row 1. So remember, row 1 is just a bark, and you take the yarn to the back, and you already have this stitch here, right here, to bark your brioche stitch. So you're going to just bark, and then yarn to the front, slip 1, bark, yarn to the front, slip 1, bark, yarn to the front, slip 1, and that's it. You're going to keep continuing it there. So when you do that, the join that actually happens, it's a much neater join. I have here this sample. Let me show you. I have here this hat that I was knitting with a similar, the same brand yarn, but just a different color. It's an orange type color, deep orange color. And you'll notice that in this one, I actually put a ribbing at the end, and that's an optional thing you can do if you want to start off with a knit 2 purl 2 or knit 3 purl 3 ribbing or something like that, or even just a knit 1 purl 1 ribbing. You could do that, or you can leave that out and just start off directly with the brioche stitch. But when you do that, then your brioche knit is actually even all the way around. So that's why, compared to my old video pattern, I changed it up a little bit here so that you're able to actually do a brioche purl at the end of that second row. So that's it. Cast on, set up row, knit 1, or first row 1 and then row 2. So now you're just going to keep doing row 1 and row 2 all the way till you get your hat to the desired length that you want. And typically that is for an adult hat, and again, the pattern I've provided is for an adult hat. It will stretch to an adult head around 20 or 21 inches. Unstretched, the finished hat is almost about 16 inches or so. So brioche stitch just does have a very wide stretch to it, so it does stretch really nicely, and you don't want the hat to be too loose, and so that's why I've kept the stitches so that it's a decently snug fit, not too tight but not too loose either. And then once you get to the height, which is about 6.5, or I would say 7 inches, better to have a longer hat than not, because you can always fold the hat at the brim if it ends up being a little too long, but you want it to cover your ears. And so you're going to keep knitting till you get to that height, and then you're going to start doing the decreases. So let me show you how to do the decreases. So to transfer stitches from your circular needles to the double pointed needles, again, you're going to need the same size of double pointed needles. So I have size 9 needles, circular needles, size 9 double pointed needles. You'll need at least 4 needles, 3 to transfer your stitches on, and then the 4th one to knit all the way around. Now when you transfer stitches, just remember, in brioche, these 2 stitches together, the brioche stitch, counts as 1 stitch. So if the pattern tells you to transfer 20 stitches, make sure you count this as 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, 6, etc., and transfer 20 stitches. What I've done is, because it's 64 stitches, it doesn't split evenly onto the 3 needles, so I have 20, 20, and 24 stitches. And when you transfer them, your work is going to look like this. Now you'll notice that I have in the sample that I'm knitting here, I have a lifeline. I would highly recommend a couple rows before you know your hat length is going to be done and you're going to get ready to do your decreases. If you haven't done so already, I would say at least a couple rows before that, put in a proactive lifeline. I've provided a link to how to put in proactive lifelines in the video description down below, because this is very, very helpful. Let's say as you're doing the decreases, something happens and you mess up and lose a stitch, or something goes wrong, which happens to me quite a bit. You want to make sure that you have a lifeline, and then that way you can just take your needles off, just pull on the yarn, and then all of your stitches will be captured and you can pick them up. And just remember, when you're picking them up, pay attention to which ones are your brioche stitches and which ones are your regular stitches. So having that lifeline a couple rows before you're ready to do the decreases really helps. Now you want to end on a row 2 so that you've completed a row 2 and then you're ready to start a row 1. That's when we're going to start the decreases. Okay, so for the decreases, the very first row, the decreases are worked in sections of essentially 6 stitches first, and then, or 6 rows rather first, and then you repeat the first 4 rows again, then you repeat the first 4 rows again, and that's how you keep decreasing until you come down to maybe 4 stitches or 5 stitches or maximum of 6 stitches, depending on the number of stitches you work. With 64 stitches, if you follow the pattern, you'll be down to 4 stitches at the end, which you then just join in. So to do the decreases, we're just going to work around needle 1, needle 2, needle 3. So the very first row, we're going to decrease the stitch count, and we'll do that by doing a bark. So you're going to take the yarn to the back, okay, and do a bark, just a regular bark. Then you're going to knit 2 together, and what that means is you're going to knit this next stitch and the next brioche stitch together. So you're going to take your needle and pass it through all of those 3 stitches, what looks like 3 stitches, but in brioche knitting it's 1 stitch, or we call it as 1 stitch and 2 stitch. So we're going to knit those 2 together like that. Then you bring the yarn to the front and slip, okay, and that's your repeat for the entire row. So bark, knit 2 together, so again this stitch and this next brioche stitch, all 3 through the front loop, and then bring the yarn over and slip. So I'm going to keep doing this row at least to the end of this needle, so then I can show you after you're done with one needle how to move to the next needle. And if you're really new to working with double pointed needles, it may seem a little bit awkward. Initially, you might feel like you need to have more arms than you actually do, but over time with practice, it'll come by just fine. You'll get it. And the one thing though is sometimes for me, working with fatter double pointed needles can be a little bit harder than working with thinner ones. Okay, so at the end of this row, we've done the yarn forward and slip 1. So your yarn is in the front. I should say at the end of this needle, not row, because we're still on the same row. Move your stitches to the center here so that you avoid the stitches, or you prevent the stitches from falling off. All right, now when you want to get started with the next needle, remember the yarn is in the front. You don't want to take the yarn to the back. The yarn stays in the front. You're going to do the bark so that you get that yarn over. Okay, let me come down. All right, so you continue on with the pattern, bark, knit 2 together, yarn to the front, slip 1, bark, knit 2 together, yarn to the front, slip, bark, knit 2 together, yarn to the front, slip. So I'm going to continue this, get to the end of the row, and I'll meet you before we start the row 2 decreases. So I've now reached the end of my row 1 of the decreases, and I end with a yarn forward, slip 1. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is when you do transfer your stitches to the needles, you might want to put in a stitch marker, because you're not going to need the stitch marker anymore on the needles, but you can put your stitch marker in here at the start, so that at the start of needle 1, so that once you've done through your needles, you know that you're at the end of the row. It just helps because sometimes we can all lose count when we're knitting around, so this way you know you're here. If you also put lifelines, then you can sort of tell from your lifelines where your needle 1 starts. So that's another way to know also. But if you have one of these markers or a safety pin or something, you can put that there. Okay, so now again, just like we do at the start of row 2, the regular brioche row 2 that we knit, you want to make sure that this yarn that is in the front, you want to bring it around like that back to the front, okay? And the reason for that is so that you do have this this brioche purl stitch at the end. Once you work the second row and you come to the end of this needle, that you'll have a brioche purl, because otherwise if you don't do this step, you'll just have a single stitch, which if that happens, don't worry about it. You can just purl it rather than do a brioche purl. Let's say you forgot to do this step, it's not the end of the world, but if you remember it, do that, okay? And the pattern will tell you to do that. So just bring the yarn around back to the front, and now we get started with the row 2 decrease. So for the row 2 decrease, the pattern repeat is you slip one stitch, slip the next stitch, bring the yarn around, and then do a burp. So here's how you want to do it. You want to take your needle and insert as if to purl, and slip, insert as if to purl and slip without doing anything. Now make sure your yarn that you already brought around once to the front is in the front of this working needle, this needle that you're knitting with. Now you're going to do a yarn over, so just going to take the yarn around both those stitches like that, and then you're going to burp the next stitch, and you can see the next stitch is a brioche stitch. We're going to burp it or purl it, brioche purl it. Okay, and that's your repeat throughout the row. So it's yarn, or slip one, slip two, take the yarn around, and burp. Okay, and now your yarn is already in the front, so you don't need to worry about bringing it to the front again or anything like that. Just slip one, slip two, yarn over, burp. Slip one, slip two, yarn over, and burp. Slip one, slip two, yarn over, and burp. As you get, as the number of stitches decrease and you get more towards the end of each needle, it might feel a little awkward, but your stitches are all there, so you don't need to worry. All right, now your yarn is in the front. At the end of this needle, your yarn is in the front. You want to leave it in the front. You can do the same thing here. Slip one, slip two. Make sure your yarn is in the front of this working needle so that you get a proper yarn over like that, and then a purl. And I'm just going to go ahead and work this whole row. So work through the rest of the needles to do this. Just move this down here. As I knit, my work keeps coming up and up and up, closer and closer to the camera, and I apologize for that. It's just one of my habits I need to learn to break. All right, here we go. And that's the end of the second needle, and now we come to the third needle again. I'm gonna slip one, slip two, make sure the yarn is in the front of this working needle, yarn over, and purl. And when I knit faster, I tend to sometimes take the yarn over even before I've slipped off the stitch. You can certainly do that as well, or you can just make sure you slip off both stitches first, then do your yarn over and burp. Okay, I am down to the last few stitches. 2 and burp. And because we did that last yarn over there, now we do have a burp stitch to burp, and it's going to give us that funky looking thing just like we had in row 2, but don't worry about it, that actually goes in. So that was the end of row 2 of the decreases. Now row 3 of the decrease, you're going to take the yarn to the back, okay, and you're going to do a knit 2 together. Oh, let me straighten these out here, my needles. Okay, here we go. Okay, so needle 1 right here. Now for row 3, it'll tell you that you have to knit 2 together, and it's not quite true, the knit 2 together. That doesn't mean that you knit this stitch and this stitch. What it means is this funky looking stitch that we have, these were the 2 stitches that we slipped and then we did the yarn over. So it's almost like a triple stitch. You're just going to knit that stitch as 1 stitch. So you're going to insert. Remember, you took your yarn to the back now to do this knit. All right, there. Then you bring the yarn to the front, slip one. So it's knit two together, yarn to the front, slip one. But just remember that your knit two together is just this knitting this funky triple stitch as one stitch. Okay, yarn to the front and knit two together, yarn to the front, slip, knit two together, yarn to the front, slip, and knit two together, yarn to the front, slip. Go on to needle two. Remember to keep the yarn in the front because you want that yarn over to happen. So knit two together, yarn to the front, slip, knit two together, yarn to the front, slip. And I know this may seem like really complicated, but once you do these first 4 rows of decreases, the pattern just repeats, and depending on the number of stitches you've cast, you'll repeat the pattern either 2 more times or you'll repeat it 3 more times, again depending on the number of stitches. For 64 stitches, you're just going to do these 4 rows of decrease 1 more time, or 2 more times rather. All right, on to the last needle. I'm gonna knit 2 together, yarn over, slip, give myself some more yarn here. I'm sorry, my yarn has horribly wrapped itself around and figured out a way to tie itself up in knots. So let me just unravel it a bit. Okay. All right. There we go. To the front. And I know sometimes these lifelines can be in the way, and if they get in the way, just tell them to go away and push them out of the way and continue knitting. All right. And we come to the last repeat. Knit 2 together, yarn to the front, and slip. Okay, so that brings us to the end of row 3 of the decreases, and you'll see now we don't have too many stitches left. We're getting down there. And row 4 is just a regular brioche type row. So you want to bring the yarn all the way to the front, as the pattern will say. Bring the yarn to the front, and then you want to slip one. Okay, then bring the yarn out like that. Make sure this yarn again comes to the front of this needle, the needle that you're knitting with, and then yarn around and burp. So this row 4 is almost identical, or it is identical to just your regular brioche row 2 that you did for the hat. Okay, so you're just going to keep doing this all the way around. That is the end of row 4. Row 5 is just a regular brioche row 1, and row 6 is just a regular brioche row 2. Now I inserted these 2 rows, row 5 and 6, because I realized that by doing that, the shape of the hat just gets a little bit nicer, rather than a more abrupt sort of roundedness to the hat. But if it's confusing to you, you can omit rows 5 and 6. Just do rows 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep repeating rows 1, 2, 3, 4 2 more times. Now, the one thing that the pattern will tell you after you've done the first 6 rows, or if you decide to omit rows 5 and 6, just do the first 4 rows, it will tell you to redistribute the stitches on the needle. And that's just so that each time you do a repeat of a row of a pattern in the row, just so that you have the right number of stitches to do the little repeat of like a burp, yarn over, slip one, or something like that, just to have the right number of stitches. So it may seem a little bit complicated or an extra step, but just redistribute the stitches as the pattern tells you. And again, know when you're redistributing the stitches, a brioche stitch, this one together, is counted as one stitch. So I'm having you redistribute the stitches at times where your pattern will look like your regular brioche, and it's not going to look like those weird triple stitches that we just saw. And that's it. Once you do that, this hat here that I knit a long time ago with the older pattern, you'll notice it ends up with a very nice edge. Now this was with a much tinier needle, and it was a different yarn, but if you choose doesn't matter which size of needle that you choose, you should get a very nice edge if you follow this pattern for the decreases. If you don't, however, or if you feel like your edge is not too neat, you could always put a pom-pom at the end, like I've done here for this hat. And I did that just because I wanted the pom-pom. And you'll notice that for this one row hat, one color hat, I did put in a different color at a couple different points just to give it some variety, but the pattern would be the same. So I pretty much did 2 rows with one color and then went back to the other color. So it's still the one color brioche pattern, even though you see 2 colors in here. And as I said, this pattern actually works really great for 2 color brioche as well, as you'll notice in this hat example that I'm showing here. And I will have a video for this. The actual knitting pattern itself is similar. You're just alternating colors in the rows as you're doing this. So the 2 color brioche is pretty much identical to this one. So I'll just have a quick short video for the 2 color brioche in a separate video for brioche hat or knitting brioche in the round. So I'm hoping you give this 1 color brioche hat a try with this new slightly enhanced pattern. And again, many apologies for the old pattern for those of you who tried it and were frustrated with it. I'm hoping this pattern won't be as difficult, but if it is, or if you have any questions, please leave me a comment in the comments box. I will do my best to answer them. And thanks again for watching and supporting my channel. If you want to stay tuned of all the upcoming videos, and I hope to have a lot more videos over the holidays and going into the new year, please subscribe to my channel, Knittycats Knits. It's always great to see your comments and your likes, and it just makes me really happy and makes me want to teach more knitting videos. So thanks again, and happy knitting.